All right, we're either going to have to build a bigger stage or you're all going to have to quit having kids. Either one of those is fine, but that apparently is the options we got here this morning. I feel when I every year when we do this exact setup here, I always feel like the guy who draws the conference session right after lunch. You know, like when I'm watching you guys, when they're singing, you're all peering around each other's head and taking videos. All of that stops when I get up here. I mean, really? Is that what we're going to do? Like everybody's kind of going to sleep now? Oh, yeah. There you go. Thanks, sir. Great. That was so sad. Okay. It's like everybody's all bright-eyed until I walk up, and then the energy just leaves the room, right, with the children. It's fantastic. So my cousin in Indiana has a game farm. He had a farm years ago. He turned it into a game farm where now he takes people on guided hunts. He raises exotic animals. He has like a skeet shooting tower, the whole bit. But the hunts are really his big thing. People come out of the city who don't have access to hunting, and they'll come there to hunt on his farm. But not only does he hunt, like he guides them. He shows them where the deer are coming, or the birds or whatever they're hunting. He takes them on this guided hunt. And so he often will have people come through. And sometimes you have people that you've heard of before, like a number of times the governor of Indiana, Mike Pence, has hunted there on his property. So earlier this year, after he was declared to be the vice presidential candidate, but before the election, Mike Pence came and hunted on his property again, but this time he had Secret Service detail because he was now the vice presidential candidate. So it changes the whole thing. And if you're a Secret Service official, going to a game farm where everyone's got a gun with them is just like a disaster if you're a Secret Service guy. So they call him ahead of time. They're screening ahead of time. There's like, so no one else can be there. It's got to be completely clear just for the governor. And my cousin's like, well, no, I mean, that's how I feed my family. So I've already got people booked. That's not an option. Either he can pick a different day and reserve the whole thing, or this is what, well, they finally decided that they'd come that day. So they came that one day, and there's hunters everywhere with rifles and shotguns and all stuff, and the Secret Service are having a fit. Because you can't, how do you defend, how does that work? So they said, okay, we're going to take you on this hunt. And so they said, you, my cousin, you've got to go with us, because if something were to happen, every part of this land, you can get us out here quickly. We've got to have you right there. Okay. So it was the governor and my cousin and a very large, slightly grumpy man with them from the Secret Service detail. And the three of them went hunting together. And my cousin said, this guy's like 6'8", 6'10", a mountain of a man, just a huge Secret Service agent. And so they're walking along, and they hadn't gone very far out into the woods, and there was a fence, and it was kind of a smaller woven wire fence, and he had to cross it. And so my cousin, just being polite, said to the governor, let me hold your shotgun while you get across there. And he said he felt this big paw on his shoulder. And the man said, if you touch his gun, I will shoot you. Like, I'm just trying to help him across the fence. He's like, I understand that. But if you touch the gun, I'm not going to shoot. I will kill you right here in this, the last thing you do. He goes, I'm just trying to help him. He said, if he falls crossing the fence and shoots himself, then I guess it's just on you. Which apparently they don't like sarcasm. That doesn't work well with Secret Service agents. So the Secret Service agent took the gun, held it away, crossed over the fence, handed it back, the whole bit. And so the Secret Service agent then turns to my cousin and says, let me just make sure we're on the same page here. We haven't had time to debrief. He said, if you put your hand inside of your coat, I will tackle you in the mud. If you put your hand down the back of your pants, I'm assuming you're going for a gun, I'm going to stick your face in the mud. Like, that's going to happen immediately. And so my cousin says, so is this a good time maybe to tell you that I always have a pistol with me at all times? And the guy looks at him and said, like, right now, I've got a pistol right here underneath my coat. How that happened, I don't know exactly. But they said, yeah, this would be a good time for us to get that from you. He said, well, do you want me to hand it? He said, no, you don't touch the gun or I will shoot you. I will get the gun. So my cousin pulls the jacket out, he grabs the gun, and they go back to that. Well, when they get back to the house, the other Secret Service agents who were there pulled my cousin off to the side and said, I just want you to know, Governor Pence will never be here ever again. This is the last time. We can't defend any of this. Everybody's got a gun. If you're preparing for somebody important, all the arrangements have to be just a certain way. Like, you can't miss a detail if you're preparing for somebody important. And I would suggest to you that we look at the Christmas story as this simple narrative, and it is, the beauties and the simplicity. But this was a grand event, a full-scale project management feat that God pulled off. And I think when we understand that, it gives us confidence that he can lead us as well. I want you to see that this morning. For hundreds of years before Jesus was born, God gave the people promise after promise after promise of not just that it would happen, but how it would happen, the details around it for hundreds of years. We call them prophecies, and all of them came true. One of the first ones we see is in 700 BC. The prophet Micah told people where Jesus would be born. He said, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times." This passage was written 700 years before Jesus was born. 700 years. Now, we lose track of that because all of it's old to us. This is all a long time ago. So let's just think about 700 years before now. If someone made a prophecy in 1300 AD about what would come true today, think how amazing that would be. Like it's something specific, not just general, but something specific, like specific towns that someone's born in or whatever. Like someone in 8013 had said that there would be a reality TV show developer who would come out of Manhattan to become president in 2016. Like, can you imagine how crazy that prophecy would have been? They would have been asking questions like, well, what's a reality television show? Or for that matter, what's a television show at all? We don't know what any of that is. And where's Manhattan? We don't know what Manhattan, they wouldn't have known in the year 1300. So for you and I to predict anything 700 years from now would be a miracle all by itself. How could we ever think about that prophecy? And yet every one of the promises that God made, many of them hundreds of years before Jesus was born, all of them came true. Some scholars estimate there are over 300 prophecies about Jesus. Over 300, like this one, all of which came true, many of them hundreds and hundreds of years in advance. So Micah tells the people that God has chosen Bethlehem. And I think that's interesting. You know, we don't know for sure why he did that. We don't know why Bethlehem was the choice. Today, Bethlehem's a town of several, tens of thousands of people. It's a nice-sized city. But in those days, probably it's 1,000 people or less. It was a small village. And why God would choose a very small place like that is just mind-boggling. It'd be like God declaring the Messiah would be born in Bethesda. Like, who chooses Bethesda for something significant like this? Now, to be fair to Bethesda, the old men at the Bethesda market would be great choices for the shepherds to come and verify the birth of Jesus. And just like in Bethlehem, you'd have to import wise men because they weren't there locally. You'd have to bring them in from the outside. So Bethesda might actually be a very good choice. It's just a joke. It's fine. But really, why did he choose Bethlehem? Like, he could have chosen Rome. Rome controlled the entire world, and the city of Rome was the capital. That would have been a logical choice for the king to come to. Or Alexandria, where Alexander the Great had been in charge. Or Corinth, a great trading city. Even Jerusalem, the head of the Jewish faith. That would have been a logical place to go. And God didn't choose any of those. God chose this out-of-the-way city of Bethlehem. Why did he do that? We don't know for sure, but I think he did it to align with us, to represent the common man. He didn't come for scholars. He didn't come for authority. He came for all of us. John Piper writes, God chose a stable so no innkeeper could boast. He chose the comfort of my inn. God chose a manger so no woodworker could boast. He chose the craftsmanship of my bed. He chose Bethlehem so no one could boast. The greatness of our city constrained the divine choice. The only reason that any of us know anything about Bethlehem at all today is because of Jesus. If it wasn't for Jesus, you might not even have ever heard the name Bethlehem. But because of Jesus, all of us know the name and all of us know of some significance. It has become a great city because of who was born in it, not the other way around. And I think that's important. 1 Corinthians 1 says, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of the world, the despised things, the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. Bethlehem was not special because of what it was on the outside. Bethlehem was special because in it was Emmanuel, literally God with us. And that translates for us, friends. It does. You and I are not special to God because of what we offer him or because of what we have to give or our great talents or abilities. We are special because God has come to live inside of us. I think this time of year is special. I know a lot of people struggle with where they're at in the world and heading into the new year, and have I done enough? And am I significant enough? Have I done the right things? What kind of life I'm living? And there's a lot of self-doubt, a lot of questioning. I want you to know you're not special because of anything you do for God. None of that makes you special. You're special because God has chosen to live inside of you. You are Bethlehem, the small little village that became this world map location because God is in you. So God has his location in Bethlehem, and when the time was right, he chose his girl, the mother for his child. Matthew 1:18 says, this is how Jesus the Messiah was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph, but before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Isaiah, 750 years before Jesus, prophesied that the baby would be born to a virgin, literally the Son of God. So God has his location in Bethlehem. God has his girl in Mary, the chosen person to deliver his baby. The only problem is Mary doesn't live in Bethlehem. In fact, Mary, by those travel standards, wasn't even close to Bethlehem. She lived 80 miles away, which seems close to us. We can hop on the interstate and go. But in those days, with travel abilities, that was a long way away. She lived 80 miles from Bethlehem and Nazareth, and she and Joseph had absolutely no reason to travel there. Every indication says they were very poor, so a trip of that magnitude for no reason wouldn't have happened. So God works through the emperor years ahead of time to get that to happen so that his girl was in his city when his son was born. Let me show it to you. Luke chapter 2 is where we're going to look this morning. Page 715 in these Bibles here. Grab one of those. Luke chapter 2. Page 715. I want to mention to you too, some of you, I know a lot of us are new to faith and new to looking at things in the Bible and all of that. If you want to read the Christmas story with your family this year, Luke chapter 2, Matthew chapter 1 and 2 is the places you'd want to go to for that. And so there's actually not as many scriptures as you might think about the Christmas story in the Bible, but those two sections would be great sections for you to read. I always, by the way, I don't think I often tell this, I always print out copies of my notes. If you ever want to see any of the scriptures I use or whatever, I always have copies back in the back. And I made extra today because I thought the Christmas story might be one you want to see. So feel free to grab one of those. Luke chapter 2 is where we're going to be this morning. Take these Bibles with you if you can use them. Luke 2, page 715, verse 1 of Luke 2 says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to their own town to register. And I love the way Luke gives some historical data of exactly when this all fit in place, and we'll look at that in a minute. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him, was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths. She placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. So God gets Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem, his chosen city, through the work of the emperor, Caesar Augustus. Now, if you're not a historical person, this is going to be a little bit boring to you. You can come back in a minute, but if you're historical, I want to give you some dates to show you how this fits together. Estimated date of Jesus' birth was probably around 6 BC. Now, that seems odd. You would think that Jesus would be born at 0, right? The Bible's not wrong here. What happened is in the 1500s, when they created what's called the Gregorian calendar that we all worldwide use, they tried to put 0 at the birth of Jesus. That was the dividing line of history. Before Christ and Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, that's why they did it. They just got their dates messed up. So the Bible's not inaccurate, it's just they got things mixed around about 500 years ago when they created the calendar. Now, this still doesn't negate the fact that every time you write a check and put a date on it, every time you put a date on a calendar, every time you celebrate New Year's, you're celebrating, declaring the entrance of Jesus into the world, whether you believe in God or not, because all of our calendars are based on Jesus coming. They just happen to get their dates a little bit off, so Jesus was actually born in 6 BC. Now, other historical records point to Herod's death in 4 BC. Now, that would line up with he killed every child 2 years old and under, so that probably happened about 2 years after Jesus' birth, maybe not quite 2 years, so that would have lined up with the 6 BC date. I think it's interesting that he died probably right after that decree. I wonder if God had something to do with that. You're going to murder a whole bunch of little kids. We're going to just be done with you today. Let you go on to do something else. But that happened at 4 BC. And then the first census we see recorded in historical writings outside of the Bible was in 6 AD. And it's recorded as Augustus Caesar's second census. It's in 6 AD. And starting right there in 6 AD, like clockwork, every 14 years there would be another census. So at 20 AD, at 34 AD, at 48 AD, you see them happening every 14 years like clockwork. So if you put that together, the second one was in 6 AD. That means the first one that wasn't really recorded much in history would have happened at 8 BC. And this causes a lot of people concern who say, no, wait a minute. If the Bible's pointing to the fact, it seems like that he was born in 6 BC, but the census happened at 8 BC, but the census got him to Nazareth. See, there's a mistake in the Bible, and it's all messed up. But you're misunderstanding, I think, the realities of the time. In our day, a decree from Washington or a decree from some other capital with 24-hour news cycles and televisions and telephones and computers would all happen immediately. But in those days, the Roman Empire was massive. They didn't have the travel or the communication that we did. So a decree that started in 6 BC for a new thing probably would take a couple years to get implemented out into all the territories. So Caesar declares it in 8 BC. It probably happened in 6 BC to get Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem right on time. Now, why is that important? I really try to protect you from giving you this nonsense trivia just because it's fun. Why is that important? I think there's 2 reasons. First of all, I want you to know the Bible can be trusted historically. Sometimes we look at historical documents from the time, other authors, Josephus or whoever, we say, well, there's all these historical documents, and how do they compare to the Bible? But it's important to remember the Bible is historically accurate as well. Luke goes to quite extent to show the historical nature of when it happened and how it happened, and it all lines up. You can trust the Bible. But more importantly, number 2, I want you to consider the coordination of all this. God inspired Augustus to decree a census before Mary was even pregnant to get her to Bethlehem at exactly the right time to deliver this child so that his girl was in his city for his son to be born at just the right time. He did all that before Mary was even pregnant. The coordination involved in getting all the prophecies to come true was mammoth. And if God can do that for this little detail, for this issue, then you can trust God with your life. You can trust God to lead you well, to coordinate the events of your life and others to see this thing through. Let's talk for just a second about Caesar Augustus before we skip on. He was born in 63 BC. He was the grandnephew of Julius Caesar, the first Caesar of Rome. When he was age 20, he was adopted by Julius as his grandnephew, adopted as his son, and declared the next heir of the Roman Empire. He was Julius's favorite. Now, what Julius didn't know is the next year he would be killed, and so all that heirship would be put to the test, and there was a real debate about it. So some people said Augustus should be Caesar, some people said his son should be Caesar. There was a big debate and fight, and for 13 years it wasn't clear on who was leading the empire. So this guy would lead this part, this guy would lead this part, and there's fighting and discussions. And finally, at the end of all of that, in 30 BC, Augustus became the emperor of the entire Roman Empire, and he was talented. He was a talented leader. He brought in what is called Pax Romana. There's a couple hundred years of peace that happened, starting with Augustus Caesar, that really was a segue for the arrival of Jesus' ministry. So much was allowed to happen because of Augustus Caesar. He created roads all over the empire that connected one group to the other. He created soft borders where you could go from one country to the next because Rome was in charge of both. So it allowed the gospel, when Jesus arrived and taught, to spread very, very quickly. He had a huge military. He was brought in a time of peace. He was very popular among his own people. And God used this leader, sometimes a ruthless leader, to create just the exact right time, as Galatians 4 says. So when Jesus came into the world, it was exactly ready for him to not only be born, but then to lead and serve and teach in a way that would spread throughout the known world. It's amazing. I think it's an interesting dichotomy. Caesar Augustus, the most powerful man in the world, high and pompous and revered. Jesus, born in a manger to peasant parents with no status or money. There's a real debate about which one really was the savior of the world. There's actually archaeological inscriptions they've found since the time about Augustus, calling him the High Holy One, calling him the savior of the world. And in reality, it wasn't him. Everyone would have, if you'd asked that day, who's the leader of the world, they all would have pointed to Caesar Augustus. But the reality was right there in their midst. The savior of the world was born, and no one saw it coming. You know, we've always had a hard time struggling who to see our Savior is. Who's going to really provide us peace? Who's going to really provide us safety and lasting tranquility? It all comes in this baby in a manger. Matthew gives us more detail. In Matthew chapter 2, it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and said, where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. They knew he was ruthless, so they kind of sensed this was going to lead to a crisis. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." He was trying to trick them into revealing the identity so he could go and kill this child himself. Now, I don't want to blow up your nativity set, but the wise men probably weren't there at the birth of Jesus. I know on your mantle it says they were. There's shepherds, there's donkeys, wise men, they're all there together. It's probably not true. It says there in Matthew 2, when they came to the house, this was probably a year and a half, maybe even 2 years later, and they had stayed there in Bethlehem, had set up shop, and were doing life there together. And when they came to Jesus, probably a toddler. He was probably moving around the house, crawling around, snotty nose, the whole bit. He's a regular kid there in the house. And there may or may not have been three of them. We often talk about three wise men. We do that in kind of history. We think about it that way because there were three gifts, so maybe it's three wise men. Maybe there was one, maybe there was 20. We don't know exactly. But all we know is there were magi from the east. I guess there's at least two. It's plural. Magi from the east. Most likely, they were from Persia, modern-day Iran. And so you have to ask the question, how did these Persian wise men know about Bethlehem and know about Jesus? How did they even know that? And most would suggest they knew about it because Daniel, 700 years earlier, was exiled out of Jerusalem into Persia and taught the wise men there. He was the chief magi at the time. He taught the wise men the ways of God, the prophecies of God, and those prophecies were passed down generation to generation to generation to generation, hundreds of years. And so now these new wise men, these new magi, knew the prophecies. They saw the star, they recognized it, and they came to see the one born King of the Jews. It's amazing, the coordination of God. From Persia, if that's where they were, to Bethlehem was about 500 miles on a straight line. But they had limited roads, they had limited bridge crossings over rivers, so probably took more like 900 miles to get there. To give you just a perspective, it'd be like traveling from here to Minneapolis or here to Miami. It's about 900 miles either way. And they were probably on a camel. You don't get to Miami by camel very quickly. So when you're complaining later this week about traveling to grandma's, it could be worse. You could be on a camel traveling to Miami. Those are two bad ideas, all at the same time, right there together. Matthew continues. It says, after they heard the king, they went on their way. The star they had seen when it rose ahead of them, until it stopped at the place where the child was, they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down, they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What do you think about the star? Like, I don't know how that worked. Did God create a new star and stick it out there for them to see and it pointed the way? I mean, God can do that. I don't know. If that wasn't what happened, he very likely coordinated the alignment of some planets or moons so that it all lined up so it gave a brighter star in the sky. Which if that happened, I mean, again, just think about the detail. If God, who created the orbits at the beginning of time, put all that together so that at this exact moment in history, at this exact time, in that exact location, those planets would be lined up together so that they could see it and point the way to Jesus. It's phenomenal to think of. The gifts they gave were symbolic: gold, incense, and myrrh. Gold was used in palaces. It was to signify royalty. It was declaring Jesus as the king. This little toddler in a house in Bethlehem, these wise men were saying, that's the king, and they were right. Incense was used in temples. It was used by priests. It was declaring Jesus to be God. Again, this little toddler moving around the house, they were saying, he's God. He is deity. He's Lord. And then myrrh, and this is weird. Let me just tell you ahead of time. Myrrh was used in burials. They didn't have embalming in those days. They didn't have all the practices we have in funeral homes today. They used myrrh to cover bodies so that you didn't have a stench. I want you to picture going to a baby shower and giving embalming fluid to the mother. Hey, Mom, this is for you. It's for Junior. I mean, it's a terrible gift, very tacky, but it was their way of saying that Jesus was come to die. Jesus wasn't just a king. He wasn't just a Lord. He was coming to give his life. He was coming to die for the sins of mankind. The thing I think was amazing is these gifts weren't just symbolic, they were practical. Very likely in the next couple of days, they sold those gifts because God warned Joseph in a dream that Herod was coming. He needed to get out of there, and he went to Egypt to escape. As the prophecy had said, God would call his son out of Egypt. Joseph took his son to Egypt to escape Herod's wrath, and he didn't have the money to do that. He's a poor peasant carpenter. He couldn't have afforded that without being able to sell some gold and incense and myrrh to fund their travels. And I just want you to think for just a minute. So God has Daniel go from Jerusalem to Babylon to the Persians to teach the wise men who taught the wise men, who taught the wise men, who taught the wise men, generation after generation after generation, hundreds of years, so that these wise men would see that star in orbit and coordination to know to go to this house in Bethlehem to give these gifts to this toddler 2 days before Herod would come, and they had to sell those to provide. Like, God arranged all of that in advance to keep his baby safe before Jesus was big enough to care for himself. It's phenomenal to me when you think about the details put together. And that creates a whole lineage of people that God used to prepare the way for the wise men to help Jesus to get him out of Herod's way. I mean, just think about this. So the Magi taught the Magi who taught the Magi taught the generations down all the way. So somewhere here in the middle, I'm picturing, I don't know, somewhere here in the middle, there's a little Sunday school teacher lady, a little grandma, whose great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa had heard from Daniel the ways of God, and then who taught these little kids in her class, who then taught their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandsons, who became the Magi, who took these precious gifts to Jesus to provide him a way to Egypt and back. You never read about her. No history book records her name, this little Persian Sunday school teacher who faithfully came in every week and taught these little bratty, rambunctious kids the ways of God. But God used her, and those before her and those after her, to save Jesus before he was even born. It's phenomenal. Phenomenal to me. And God is still about that same business. I think the two things I think that jump out at me this morning that we can learn from this story is, number one, our lives are safe in God's hands. God used Micah and Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar and Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar and a Persian Sunday school teacher and a census decree combined with a slow Roman bureaucracy, obedient stargazers with expensive gifts. God used all of those people to prepare the way for Jesus so that everything fell into place exactly the way it needed to work. All of them working together to get the girl God chose with the baby that she carried into the city that was his decree at just the right time for his birth. It's amazing what God did. And if God can work through thousands of people over hundreds of years to arrange the events of that day, he can take care of you. And he can take care of me. If you understood how much power God has to care for your life and to be what he needs to be in your life, you would have a lot more peace this year. 2 Thessalonians says, now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times and in every way. The Lord be with you all. He's not saying the absence of problems. He's saying that you'd have peace in spite of great difficulty. I mean, Mary and Joseph had the scandal of the virgin birth over their head. They were poor. They had to travel a long ways right before the birth, and then had to leave immediately with a newborn baby to Egypt, to a place they'd never been, hawking off gifts to find ways. I mean, it was a terribly difficult time. And yet they had peace because God was with them. I want you to know that God always keeps his promises. From my experience, God is rarely early, but he is always on time. And in your life, you may wish he would move faster, but he will be there when he says. He can be trusted. His promises are strong enough to build a life upon. Now, that's important for all of us. You know, if you're having a great day and life is great and Christmas is your favorite time of year, it's important for you to know that. But it's especially important for you to know if you're hanging on to your faith by a thread. Because Christmas is really hard for some of us. And if you're here this morning and you're grieving and you're facing loss and you're facing confusion and you're not sure God's going to show up, I mean, you're waiting for him to, you're thinking he's going to, but you're not seeing it happen. It's important to know that God is rarely early, but he's never late. And he can be trusted. His promises are true. The birth of Jesus reminds us that our lives are safe in God's hands. Your life is safe in God's hands. Secondly, I want you to know that this story tells us that our lives matter. Anytime we give of ourselves, every time we give of ourselves, God uses that gift as part of his larger work in the world to change mankind. Every kind word offered, every dollar given, every lesson taught is part of God's patchwork quilt that he puts together to cover the needs of the world. You know, you may not be able to see this side of heaven how God uses your gifts, God, your abilities, your talents, your willingness to help someone and offer a kind word. How God uses that maybe generations later to do something dramatic in the lives of his people. It changes the way you look at your life. Romans chapter 12, I love the Message version here, says, here's what I want you to do, God says, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the very best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging us down to the level of immaturity, God brings out the best in you, develops well-formed maturity in you. Sometimes I think we think, well, I don't have anything to offer. I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm just an ordinary gal trying to do life here. But how many hundreds of those people did God use to coordinate the events of those days? Your life matters. Not because of what you have to offer God, but because God is in you. And when you give your life to God as an offering, He can work inside that ordinary life to do amazing, extraordinary things. It's so important for all of us to know that, but it's especially important if you're growing tired and weary of trying to do what's right. You feel like you're doing the right thing, it's just not coming together, and you're not sure this marriage is ever going to get easier, and you're not sure your job is ever going to be less terrible, and you're not sure you're ever going to get that promotion, and you're not sure you're ever going to be able to do the things that you feel God calling you to do. If that's where you are, this is especially important for you. Galatians chapter 6 says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. God, the great master of the universe, says, if you keep doing good, eventually, at just the right time, it's going to all come together. When has He said that before? He said at just the right time in history, God sent Jesus into the world, and we know that He did. And the God who can arrange all the just the right times for Jesus to come into the world can arrange the events of your life as well. Our lives matter, so don't give up. Keep doing good. Keep following God. Keep laying your life down every day as an offering, and watch what God does with it. When you see the birth of Jesus, when you celebrate this week the coming of the Messiah, know that He came to save you from your sins, but know in addition to that, that's a sign to you that your life matters, that God can be trusted, that He always keeps His promises. Let's bow our heads and pray. God, I ask that You would help drive these simple truths down deep into our souls. For all of us, God, we all need that, but especially, God, for those who are weary, for those whose life is struggle, and they're not sure You're going to show up. They've been waiting an awful long time. And they're not sure You're going to come through. And they're not sure that their life is safe in Your hands. And they're not sure their life matters. God, I pray especially for the men and women that fit that description, that You would drive this message deep into their soul and provide them a peace and a strength and a comfort that comes out of that place that doesn't come from anything else. No absence of conflict, no absence of struggle will ever provide the peace that reality does if we allow it to dig in deep into our life and our heart and our mind and our soul. So God, help us to know that the one who coordinated the events of history to provide for Jesus is still on the throne. And You still care, and You still provide, and You still arrange, and You still lead, and You still make enough out of what's not enough. I want you to take a moment to pray to God, just from wherever you sit, just in your own words. Lay out your life before Him as an offering. Lay out your concerns, lay out your grief, lay out your mourning and sadness, lay out your excitement and joy. Lay it all before the Lord as an offering to Him, and ask Him to direct your steps going forward.